The leather of the law office chair creaked beneath me as I shifted the only sound in a room heavy with finality. My black dress clung to me like a second skin, still holding the scent of Levi's cologne from the funeral 3 days earlier. The air smelled of dust paper and polished wood, an odd mix of the past and the impersonal. Callum sat across from me, jaw tight, tapping his foot against the marble floor. Trina lounged beside him, legs crossed, her nails gleaming pink against the folder she hadn't bothered to open. She didn't look at me. She rarely did. Mr. Hensley, Levi's lawyer for as long as I could remember, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "This won't take long," he said gently but not kindly. Then, with the soft crinkle of paper, he began to read. "To my beloved wife, Nadine Rowan, I leave the ranch property on Bitterroot Hollow Road." Trina let out a sharp sigh and rolled her eyes so hard it was audible. "Oh, for God's sake. That place, just sell it already and come live with us. You could be helpful at least." I blinked, stunned by the casual cruelty in her voice. Callum didn't correct her. He didn't say a word. He just stared down at his hands like he didn't recognize them. Mr. Hensley went on, his voice quieter now. "The primary residence, remaining investments, and all other assets are to be divided between—" Something worth hearing. Trina interrupted, sitting straighter. Callum glanced up but said nothing. They spoke about my life like I wasn't in the room. When it was over, Trina stood first, smoothing her skirt and slinging her purse over one shoulder. "Well, I guess that's settled," she said, her smile full of triumph. "Get out of our lives and go play farmer. Maybe some time alone will help you think about how you failed as a mother." The words struck deeper than I let show. Callum finally looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw hesitation. Then he said quietly, "Maybe it's for the best, Mom. You and Trina never really got along." I nodded, numb. "I'll pack my things." As I walked past them, Trina called after me, "Take your old junk too. We're redecorating." Her laugh trailed behind me like smoke. Outside, the cold hit harder than I expected. I wrapped my coat tighter, trying to keep something in me from spilling over. I'd lost Levi, and now, without ceremony, I'd lost my son too. The ranch was waiting. I didn't drive straight to the ranch. I parked by the edge of a quiet park near the courthouse and sat there in silence, hands resting on the steering wheel. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked unfamiliar. Older, yes, but mostly erased, like someone had spent years slowly rubbing away the parts of me that mattered. I closed my eyes and the past came rushing in. Callum was 6 when Levi took a visiting professorship in Colorado. The plan had been for a year, maybe 2. It turned into 6. I stayed behind in Montana because someone had to keep the household together. Someone had to make sure Callum didn't feel abandoned. I worked nights at the hospital and picked up private shifts on weekends. I learned how to stretch $50 across 2 weeks, how to sew up torn backpacks and fix broken faucets, and how to smile when I was too tired to speak. Levi published papers, Callum made honor roll, and I clapped for both. I skipped girls' weekends and family reunions. I let my nursing license lapse so I could take steadier shifts that matched Callum's school hours. I never once missed a parent-teacher conference, not even when I had a fever or when my car broke down and I had to walk across town. And now, after all that I'd been asked to leave quietly like I was the family's forgotten stain on the carpet, not even a confrontation, just an eviction masked as politeness. I leaned back in the seat and stared out at the pine trees swaying in the wind. I had always believed love was enough, but now I wasn't sure love meant anything if it came with no memory of sacrifice. The engine turned over without hesitation. I shifted into drive. It was time to see what Levi had left behind. The road to Bitterroot Hollow stretched longer than I remembered. 40 miles of nothing but dust-sloping fields and an empty sky that pressed down harder the closer I got. Levi used to say the silence out here was good for the soul. I'd never disagreed until now. I passed the crooked mailbox with our name still fading on the side. No one had bothered to repaint it in years. I turned down the gravel path and the tires crunched in protest as if the car itself didn't want to arrive. The ranch came into view slowly, half sunken behind weeds and thyme. Trina once scoffed that it looked like a haunted house. Let her rot with her dusty memories she'd whispered loud enough for me to hear at a family barbecue. I pulled up near the porch and killed the engine. The silence was immediate, absolute. No voices, no hum of a fridge, not even the whine of a far-off car. Just the wind pushing against the boarded-up windows like it too wanted to leave. The key was still under the third step. Levi had never trusted locks. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old wood, the kind of stillness that made you feel like you were trespassing on your own life. I set my bags down in the corner and stood in the center of the room. Every corner carried his absence. His boots weren't by the door. His mug wasn't by the sink. There was no sound of his breathing when the floor creaked. I didn't cry at the funeral. Not when the casket lowered or when Callum handed me a limp hug. But now, in the middle of this hollow house, I collapsed, and I wept until my ribs ached. The next morning, I pulled my hair back, rolled up my sleeves, and started to clean. I didn't do it with any grand purpose, just something to stop the stillness from swallowing me whole. The ranch had been sitting untouched for years, and every room wore a thick coat of neglect. Dust clung to windows like frost cobwebs crowned the corners, and the scent of old paper and time hung heavy in the air. I began in the kitchen scrubbing one cabinet at a time, slowly peeling back the years with each swipe of a rag. I imagined Levi standing behind me, arms crossed, watching with that quiet look he always gave when he didn't know how to say thank you. He never liked clutter, but he didn't like letting go either. Every drawer held some small token of that tension, faded labels, bent, spoons notes written in margins. Behind the pantry shelves, I found a loose panel. The wood gave with a little pressure, revealing a shallow cavity between the wall and the old exterior. Inside was a rusted tin box wrapped in oilcloth. I carried it to the table hands, trembling, heart-thudding with something I couldn't name yet. Inside, tied with string, were yellowed envelopes and folded papers, some handwritten, some typewritten. At the bottom were two brittle black-and-white photographs of men standing beside rock faces. One of them was Levi's grandfather. The other, I wasn't sure. There were maps, small hand-drawn ones at first, then later versions stamped with the seal of the Montana Bureau of Mines. Assay reports some from as early as 1947. Words like copper-bearing formation and vein projection leapt off the page. There were even notes in Levi's handwriting, familiar curves and slants, just as I remembered them on birthday cards and grocery lists. I sat back, breath caught in my throat. He knew, he had known for years, and yet he never told me. Not once. I picked up one of the letters and unfolded it slowly. The signature at the bottom was Levi's. The date was 3 years ago. He'd been investigating it again, quietly, deliberately. And instead of leaving it to Callum, he left it to me. I read the note 3 times before I let myself believe it was real. It wasn't folded like the others, just tucked flat between a pair of maps at the bottom of the box, as if he'd wanted it found, but not too quickly. The ink had bled a little along the edges, but the words were unmistakably his. Don't let Callum and Trina ruin what we built. You deserve better. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you more. Some things had to wait. Trust yourself. The rest is yours now. I ran my fingers over the signature. The final loop in his L slightly rushed the way it always was when he wrote late at night. There was no greeting, no date, just the weight of everything he hadn't said in life pressed between those few lines. For a long time I sat in the dim kitchen, the letter resting open on the table. I thought of the years I'd spent believing I was invisible to him while he focused on lectures, tenure reviews, and quiet conversations with Callum that I wasn't invited to. I thought of how many times I'd stood on the edge of their father-son bond, unsure whether my place was sacred or optional. But now, this. He hadn't left me the ranch out of convenience or sentiment. He'd left it to shield it from greed, from manipulation, maybe even from the boy we raised. He'd seen something coming, or perhaps he'd seen something years ago that I was only just beginning to face. I should have been angry that he kept it from me, but I wasn't. Not yet. Instead, all I felt was the cold, steady shape of clarity forming beneath my grief. I pressed the letter to my chest, closed my eyes, and whispered a name I hadn't said aloud since the funeral. Thank you, Levi. And for the first time since the will was read, I knew what I had to do. The number on the business card had been scribbled in Levi's handwriting right above a printed logo that read, Southwestern Minerals. I dialed it with more caution than hope, expecting a deadline or a polite dismissal. Instead, a woman answered on the second ring, her tone brisk but professional. Mrs. Rowan, we've been waiting to hear from you. Within 3 days, Arlo Sutton arrived at the ranch in a truck that looked like it hadn't touched a dirt road in months. He was in his 60s, sun-lined and clear-eyed, with the easy confidence of a man who spent his life convincing people to dig deep into the earth. We walked the edges of the property, his assistant taking notes and pointing out rock formations I'd never noticed. Arlo asked if I knew what I had. I shook my head, and he smiled like someone about to deliver good news that would also change everything. There's a copper seam running through here. High grade. Clean. Whoever surveyed this knew what they were doing. He paused, tapping his clipboard. I'll get to the point. We're prepared to offer $4 million up front, and quarterly royalties averaging $400,000. I stopped walking. $4 million. He nodded. And that's conservative. If copper prices hold or climb, you'll see more. The numbers didn't land all at once. They settled slowly like snow on a quiet roof. For the first time in my life, I wasn't someone hoping to be spared. I wasn't the afterthought at a family table or the woman cleaning up after someone else's dream. I was the one holding the deed. The one holding the leverage. I took the papers he offered my hand, steady my voice clearer than it had been in weeks. I'll have my attorney look them over. But yes, I'm interested. He smiled. Smart move. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table alone, the contract resting beside a cup of untouched tea. The silence around me didn't feel empty this time. It felt expectant. And then my phone buzzed with a message from Callum. The first voicemail came just after dusk. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the voice. Mom, it's me. Callum. I know things got tense. Can we talk? I let it play without flinching and didn't bother saving it. The second came the next morning, then another, and another. By the end of the week, I had 12 unread messages from my son and 2 emails from Trina, then apologies wrapped in vague pleasantries and phrases like, let's not dwell on the past and we're still family. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence was its own kind of answer, one they weren't used to hearing. It didn't take long to figure out what had prompted their sudden concern. A formal letter arrived from a law office in town, a quiet inquiry about the mineral rights boundaries surrounding the Rowan subdivision land that Levi's grandfather had divided decades ago, keeping the original mineral titles attached only to the ranch. Callum's house, their prized symbol of success, sat on a piece of ground legally disconnected from what lay beneath it. They'd built their future on surface-level ownership. And now the foundation they thought they controlled was under my name. By the time Callum left his 20th message, his tone had changed. Mom, please, I think maybe we overreacted. Trina's she's stressed. I was too. Look, we didn't know what that ranch really was. Let's talk. Okay, we can fix this. But I didn't want to fix it. Not the way they meant. I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I simply no longer felt compelled to explain myself or to comfort the people who had watched me leave and never once asked if I had anywhere to go. I stood at the window that night and watched the wind roll across the fields. The phone buzzed again behind me, another message I wouldn't return. There were choices waiting now, and for the first time in my life, they were mine alone to make. On the 27th call, I finally answered. There was a pause before his voice came through as if even he hadn't expected me to pick up. Mom, yes. Relief spilled through the line like static. Thank you. I wasn't sure you'd answer. You're not wrong. Another pause. Then carefully, we've run into a few issues. With the house, property taxes, some refinancing hurdles. Trina's talking about finally doing the kitchen remodel, but we're short right now. About $60,000. I didn't speak. I wanted to hear how he would say it, how far he'd go. We thought maybe with the ranch deal, maybe you could help. Just for now. We'd pay you back. The week carried weight like I was being folded back into a family meeting I'd never been invited to in the first place. She's also mentioned the apartment above the garage again, he added. Thinks it could be good for you. Close to the grandkids. Privacy, but still part of everything. The words settled between us like fog. Familiar, expected, ridiculous. I waited just long enough to make sure he'd finished. You once told me to disappear, I said softly. And I did. You don't get to summon me back now that I'm valuable. Mom, you made your choices. You let her speak for both of you. I respected that. Now respect this. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said the words I'd been carrying like stones in my chest for weeks. I'm not your backup plan. The silence on his end was longer this time. He didn't hang up. He didn't argue. For once, he didn't know what to say. I ended the call. Then I set the phone on the table face down and opened the folder Arlo had left with me the week before. The contract was ready. The figures had been updated. The pen was in my hand before I even realized I'd reached for it. The attorney Arlo recommended was sharp, efficient, and didn't waste time explaining things twice. Patricia Wells had handled enough mineral rights cases to know what mattered, and she made sure I did too. Every clause, every percentage, every projected royalty was examined until I could recite it back without missing a decimal. When I signed my name at the bottom of the final page, something shifted. It wasn't joy or even relief. It was quieter than that. Like a lock clicking open inside me, one that had rusted shut for years. The money arrived less than a month later, $4 million wired into a new account in my name alone. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. I used a portion to repair the ranch, but I didn't make it grand. Just clean, solid, and finally mine. I insulated the walls, replaced the windows, installed solar panels on the roof. I hired local crews and paid them fairly. I turned one of the barns into a workspace and another into a quiet guest house just in case. The rest went into trust accounts. Not for Callum, not for Trina, but for women in the county who'd aged out of caregiving jobs and had nowhere to go. For single mothers studying nursing. For the hospice where Levi spent his final weeks. I didn't need to be remembered. I just wanted to stop disappearing. For 40 years, I was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone useful, someone available. Today, I was something else entirely. I was my own legacy. And just as the snow began to melt off the roof, the phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number and I let it ring a little longer before I answered. Spring had crept in without fanfare. The snow melted, the ground softened, and the wind didn't bite quite so hard. I had just returned from town when I noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. It was Callum's voice, quieter than I remembered. Emma made the honor roll, he said after a pause. Tommy's playing soccer. He scored last weekend. I thought, maybe you'd want to know. There was another pause, longer this time. I'm trying, Mom. Trying to be the man you raised. No apology, no request. Just that. A small sentence filled with something that almost sounded like truth. I stood by the kitchen counterphone still in my hand, replaying his voice in my mind. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still. Later that afternoon, I called him back. Tell them I'd love to visit, I said, and I'll bring my pot roast recipe. He didn't respond right away. I could hear him exhale softly like he hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. That'd be great, Mom, he said finally. They've missed you. I've missed them too. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. We both knew this wasn't a reset. There was no going back to what we'd been before. But maybe, just maybe, there was something new waiting, something built slowly, carefully on ground that had been scorched and cleared. He asked if I wanted to talk to Emma, and I said yes. Her voice was bright young, full of the kind of hope that doesn't yet understand how fragile people can be. We spoke for a few minutes, schoolbook soccer, and when I hung up, the ranch felt a little less quiet than before. Outside, the wind shifted, and for the first time in years, I let it in. The check came on a Wednesday, thick envelope, crisp paper. $437 on dollars for 3 months' worth of copper pulled from the land no one wanted me to have. I didn't flinch when I opened it. The numbers didn't startle me anymore. What startled me was how little I needed them to mean something. I sat on the porch with my tea, watching the distant silhouettes of the mining crew moving like clockwork across the hills. The hum of machinery had become a rhythm in my days, not disruptive, but steady, like a heartbeat I hadn't known I'd been missing. This land, this forgotten piece of Levi's family, had once been handed to me like a burden. Now it was mine on my own terms. They had thrown me out to silence me, pushed me to the edge of their world, thinking I would vanish without noise. But the silence didn't break me. It steadied me. It taught me how to listen to my own voice, how to recognize my own worth without someone else's permission. And in that quiet, I found something far louder than anger, peace. Not the kind that forgets, but the kind that no longer needs permission to move forward. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for an invitation. I was never just someone's mother. I was a woman worth listening to,